The house was quiet that evening, save for the soft hum of the dishwasher downstairs and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling into the night. I stood before the full-length mirror in our bedroom, tilting my head as I smoothed the strap of my dress. A deep emerald silk that clung just enough to remind me I still had a shape worth noticing. My reflection stared back, familiar yet foreign. Chestnut hair swept into loose waves, hazel eyes catching the lamplight, lips painted a shade bolder than usual. I looked like Sarah, the wife, the mother, the woman Tom had married 12 years ago. But there was something else tonight. A flicker in my gaze, a restlessness I couldn't name. "Sarah, you almost ready?" Tom's voice floated up the stairs, warm and easy, threaded with the casual patience I'd come to expect. He was in the kitchen, probably adjusting his tie or checking his phone, oblivious to the extra minutes I'd spent here, fussing over details he wouldn't notice. "Almost." I called back, forcing a lilt into my tone. My fingers lingered on the earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. Simple pearls, elegant in their understated way. Back then he'd fastened them himself, his hands brushing my neck, his breath close enough to stir something alive in me. Now they dangled like relics of a different life, cold against my skin. I turned from the mirror, smoothing my dress one last time, and caught the faint scent of jasmine drifting through the open window. Summer hung heavy outside, the kind of night that felt like it could swallow secrets whole. Downstairs, Tom waited, his broad shoulders filling out the navy blazer he always wore to these things. Work parties, the endless parade of handshakes and small talk that made up his world as a mid-level manager. I'd been his shadow at enough of them to know the script. Smile, nod, sip the too-sweet wine and laugh at the right moments. It was a role I'd perfected, polished over years until it fit like a second skin. But tonight that skin felt tight, almost suffocating. I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way Tom had barely glanced at me when I'd come downstairs earlier, testing the waters with a twirl of the dress. "Looks nice," he'd said, his eyes already drifting back to his phone. Nice. The word had landed like a pebble in a still pond, ripples of disappointment I'd quickly smoothed over. He hadn't seen the effort, the way I'd brushed my hair until it gleamed, the perfume I'd dabbed at my wrists, the heels I'd cozened despite knowing I'd regret them by midnight. He saw me, but he didn't see. The drive to the party was a familiar blur. Streetlights streaking past, the low hum of the radio filling the silence between us. Tom tapped the steering wheel, recounting some office story about a coworker's botched presentation. His laugh was a steady rhythm, comforting in its predictability, and I nodded along, murmuring the occasional "really?" or "that's ridiculous." It was our dance, one we'd perfected over years of marriage. He talked, I listened, and the space between us stayed soft and unexamined. "You okay?" he asked suddenly, glancing over as we pulled into the driveway of the grand house hosting the event. The place glowed like a lantern, windows spilling golden light onto the manicured lawn, voices already buzzing from within. I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, fine. Just tired maybe." He smiled, that easy grin that still softened his features despite the lines creeping in around his eyes. "Won't be too late. Promise." I nodded, stepping out into the humid night, the gravel crunching under my heels. The air was thick, pressing against my skin, and I adjusted my shawl as we approached the entrance. Inside, the room unfolded in a swirl of motion. Suits and dresses, clinking glasses, laughter rising like steam. Tom's colleagues greeted us, their faces familiar from a dozen other nights like this. I slipped into my role effortlessly, offering smiles and polite hellos, my hand resting lightly on Tom's arm as he launched into conversation. But as the crowd shifted, my eyes wandered unbidden across the room. And there he was, Daniel, leaning against the bar, a glass of whiskey cradled in his hand. His dark hair was mussed just enough to look careless, his posture relaxed yet magnetic, drawing glances from those around him. He was Tom's best friend, a fixture in our lives for years. Barbecues, birthdays, late-night beers on our porch. I'd always known him as that. Daniel, the charmer, the one who could make a room laugh without trying. Tonight, though, something shifted. His head turned, and his eyes found mine through the haze of bodies and chatter. It wasn't a glance. It was a tether pulling taut across the distance. My breath hitched, a jolt running through me I couldn't explain. Heat crept up my neck and I looked away, focusing on the glass of wine someone had pressed into my hand. The liquid trembled slightly as I lifted it to my lips. "Sarah," You remember Mark from accounting? Tom's voice broke through, grounding me. I turned, pasting on a smile, and nodded at the man beside him, launching into the expected pleasantries. But even as I spoke, I felt it. The weight of Daniel's gaze, lingering like a touch I couldn't shake. The night stretched ahead, a tightrope I hadn't known I'd stepped onto. And as I stood there, surrounded by laughter and light, a quiet question bloomed in the back of my mind. What was it about tonight that felt so dangerously alive? The party hummed around me, a symphony of clinking glasses and overlapping voices, each note blending into a familiar chaos. I stood beside Tom, my fingers curled loosely around the stem of my wine glass, nodding as he gestured animatedly through another story. His colleagues laughed on cue, their faces flushed with drink and camaraderie, and I mirrored their smiles, letting the sound wash over me like a tide I could ride without effort. It was safe here in this orbit of routine, Tom's arm brushing mine, the predictable rhythm of his world pulling me along. But my eyes betrayed me. They drifted again, slipping past the cluster of suits and sequins, past the trays of canapes circling the room, until they landed where they shouldn't. Daniel was still by the bar, his silhouette sharp against the warm glow of the pendant lights. He'd shed his jacket now, the white shirt rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms tanned from weekends on his boat. Weekends Tom had joined him on, leaving me with the kids in a quiet house. He was talking to a woman I vaguely recognized, her head tilted back in laughter, and something twisted in my chest, sharp and unfamiliar. I took a sip of wine, the taste too sweet against the sudden dryness in my throat. Why did it matter? Daniel was free to charm whoever he pleased, he always had. I'd seen it before. The way women leaned in when he spoke, the way his grin could unravel a room. It was part of who he was, part of why Tom loved him like a brother. So why, tonight, did it feel like a thread pulling too tight? Sarah, you've got to hear this one, Tom said, nudging me gently. His voice tugged me back and I turned, blinking into the moment. He launched into a tale about a client's absurd demands, his hands painting the air, and I forced a laugh, letting it bubble up just loud enough to fit. But as the group dissolved into chuckles, I stole another glance across the room. Daniel's head turned mid-sentence and our eyes locked again, this time longer, a beat that stretched beyond accident. My pulse quickened, a staccato against the dull hum of the party. I broke the gaze first, heat flooding my cheeks, and busied myself adjusting the shawl slipping from my shoulders. It was nothing, I told myself. A trick of the light, a flicker of boredom in a night too long. Tom's hand rested briefly on my back, steady and warm, and I leaned into it, anchoring myself to him. He was my husband, solid, dependable, the man who'd carried me over the threshold of this life we'd built. Whatever this was, it wasn't worth unraveling that. Need some air? Tom asked, his brow creasing slightly as he studied me. You look a little flushed. I seized the excuse, nodding. Yeah, it's warm in here. I'll step out for a minute. He squeezed my arm, already turning back to his conversation. Don't get lost out there. I wove through the crowd, the chatter fading into a dull roar as I reached the glass doors leading to the terrace. The night air hit me like a sigh, cool and laced with the scent of cut grass and distant jasmine. I stepped onto the stone tiles, my heels clicking softly, and moved to the railing. The lawn stretched out below, shadowed and vast, the stars pricking the sky with a clarity that felt almost accusing. I closed my eyes, breathing deep, willing the knot in my chest to loosen. The door creaked behind me and I tensed, assuming it was Tom checking in. But the voice that followed wasn't his. Beautiful night, isn't it? It was Daniel, his tone low and smooth, curling around me like smoke. I didn't turn, my hands tightening on the railing. Yes, I said, the word barely above a whisper. My heart thudded, a traitor in my ribs. He stepped closer. I could feel it, the shift in the air, the warmth of him just beyond reach. Thought I'd find you out here, he said, casual yet deliberate. You looked like you were drowning in there. I forced a small laugh, still staring out at the night. It's a lot of people. I just needed a break. Fair enough. He leaned against the railing beside me, not too close, but close enough that I caught the faint cedar of his cologne. Tom's in his element, though. Always is. Yeah, I agreed, my voice steadier now. He loves this stuff. A silence settled, not uncomfortable but charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I risked a glance at him, his profile sharp in the moonlight, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the lawn. He looked different out here, away from the crowd. Less the Joker, more something I couldn't place. You don't, though, he said suddenly, turning his head to meet my gaze. Love it, I mean. I blinked, caught off guard. I don't mind it. It's part of being with him. He nodded, but there was a question in his eyes, one he didn't voice. You're good at it, Sarah. The smiling, the listening. Most people wouldn't guess you're counting the minutes. My breath hitched. How did he see that? I opened my mouth to protest, to deflect, but the words stalled. Instead I said, maybe I'm just tired tonight. Maybe, he echoed, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He straightened, his hands sliding into his pockets, and for a moment I thought he'd leave it there. But then he added, softer, you look stunning, by the way. That dress, it's something else. The compliment landed like a spark on dry grass, igniting a flush I couldn't hide. Thank you, I murmured, my voice trembling despite myself. I should have left then, turned back to the safety of the party, to Tom's oblivious laughter. But my feet stayed rooted, pinned by the weight of his words, by the way they stirred something dormant inside me. Daniel, I started, unsure what I even meant to say. He waited, his gaze steady, patient. Too patient. And in that pause I felt it. The current beneath the surface, pulling me toward a shore I hadn't dared imagine. The terrace felt smaller now, the night pressing in as Daniel stood beside me, his presence a quiet storm I couldn't outrun. The air was cool against my skin, but it did nothing to temper the heat rising beneath it. Heat from his words, from the way his eyes held mine like they saw past the mask I'd worn so long. I clutched the railing tighter, the metal biting into my palms, a lifeline to steady the tremor inside me. Daniel, I said again, my voice a fragile thread. We shouldn't. I didn't finish. Shouldn't what? Talk like this? Stand so close. Feel the way I did, with my husband's laughter echoing faintly through the glass doors behind us? The sentence hung unfinished, a confession I couldn't voice. He shifted just a fraction, his shoulder brushing the space near mine. Not touching, but near enough to make me aware of every inch between us. Shouldn't what, Sarah? His tone was soft, almost gentle, but there was an edge beneath it, a challenge that dared me to name it. I swallowed, my throat tight. You know what I mean. Do I? He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my breath catch. I'm just standing here talking to a friend. Unless there's something else you're afraid of. The word afraid landed like a stone, rippling through me. I wasn't afraid, not of him, not exactly. It was something deeper, something coiled in the pit of my stomach, waking after years of sleep. I turned my face away, back to the shadowed lawn, the stars blurred through a haze I couldn't blink away. You're Tom's best friend, I said, the reminder as much for me as for him. And I'm his wife, he finished, his voice low, laced with something I couldn't decipher, resignation maybe, or regret. I know that. I've known it every time I've seen you smile at him, every time I've watched you play the part. The part. The words stung, peeling back a layer I'd kept carefully stitched. It's not a part, I snapped, sharper than I meant. It's my life. He didn't flinch. Is it? He asked, quieter now, his gaze searching mine. Because out here right now you don't look like the Sarah who nods and laughs and fades into the background. You look alive. Alive. The words sank into me, heavy and bright, igniting a flicker I'd smothered beneath dishes and carpools and Tom's steady, predictable love. I hated how it fit, how it named the ache I'd carried without knowing. You don't get to say that, I whispered, my voice trembling. You don't get to see that. Why not? He stepped closer, not much, just enough to make the air between us thin. Because I'm not supposed to notice? Because I'm not supposed to care? Daniel, stop. My plea was raw, a crack in the wall I'd built. I turned to face him fully, needing him to see the line I was drawing, even as it wavered. His eyes were dark, shadowed by the night, but they held a fire that mirrored the one sparking in me. Dangerous, reckless, impossible. I've been thinking about you, he said suddenly, the confession slipping out like a breath he couldn't hold. More than I should. More than I have any right to. My heart stumbled, a wild thud against my ribs. Don't, I said, shaking my head. Please don't. But he didn't stop. It's not just tonight, he went on, his voice steady despite the weight of it. It's every time I'm around you. Every time I catch you looking at the world like you're waiting for something more. I see it, Sarah, even if he doesn't. He, Tom. The name unspoken but deafening, a tether yanking me back from the edge. I closed my eyes, willing the words away, willing my pulse to slow. Tom loves me, I said, more to myself than to him. He's good to me. I know he is, Daniel replied, his jaw tightening. He's my best friend. He's the best guy I know. And I hate myself for this, for feeling it anyway. Then why say it? My voice broke, a tear slipping free despite my effort to hold it back. Why put it out there when we can't, when it's wrong? Because it's there, he said simply, his hands flexing at his sides as if resisting the urge to reach out. Because pretending it's not doesn't make it go away. The silence that followed was thick, a tangle of longing and guilt weaving tighter around us. I could hear the party beyond the doors, Tom's voice rising in a laugh, the clatter of glasses, the life I'd chosen. And yet here I was, teetering on a precipice with a man who saw me in ways Tom hadn't in years. The weight of it pressed down, suffocating and exhilarating all at once. I can't do this, I murmured, stepping back, the cool stone under my heels grounding me. I can't be this person. Daniel's shoulders sagged, a flicker of pain crossing his face. I don't want you to be anyone you're not, he said. I needed you to know. Why? I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated, then met my eyes with a rawness that stole my breath. Because if I didn't, I'd always wonder. The words hung there, a fragile thread stretched between us, trembling with what might have been. I turned away, my shawl slipping as I moved toward the door, needing distance, needing the noise of the party to drown out the echo of his confession. But as my hand touched the handle, I paused, glancing back. He stood there, framed by the night, his expression a mix of hope and defeat. Sarah, he said softly, one last tether. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I pushed through the door, the warmth and light of the party swallowing me whole, leaving him and that thread behind. But it followed me, invisible and taut, pulling at every step. The party roared back to life as I stepped inside, a wave of heat and sound crashing over me. I blinked against the brightness, the chandeliers casting golden shards across the room, and for a moment, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. The terrace lingered behind me, Daniel's words, his gaze, the electric hum of what we'd almost let unravel. My shawl hung crooked, slipping from one shoulder, and I tugged it up, a flimsy shield against the chaos within. Tom was where I'd left him, surrounded by a knot of colleagues, his laugh cutting through the din like a beacon. I moved toward him, my heels unsteady on the polished floor, each step a deliberate choice to return. He glanced up as I approached, his grin softening into something familiar, something safe. There you are, he said, reaching out to pull me close. Thought you'd run off with the catering staff. The group chuckled and I managed to smile, leaning into his arm. Just needed some air, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's a lot in here. He squeezed my waist, oblivious to the tremor beneath my words. Yeah, these things can wear you out. Want me to grab you another drink? No, I'm good, I replied, resting my hand on his chest, anchoring myself to the warmth of him. His heartbeat thudded under my palm, steady and sure, a rhythm I'd known for years. This was my place, beside him in the life we'd built, the one with school runs and mortgage payments and Sunday mornings tangled in sheets. I repeated it like a mantra, willing it to drown out the echo of Daniel's voice. But my eyes betrayed me again. They darted across the room, finding him despite my resolve. Daniel had returned inside, standing near the bar once more, his posture casual but his gaze fixed somewhere distant. He didn't look at me, not now, but I felt the weight of him anyway, a shadow stitched to my every move. The thread he'd pulled on the terrace hadn't snapped. It had tightened, winding around my ribs, tugging at something I couldn't cut loose. Sarah. Tom's voice pulled me back. He was watching me, his brow creased faintly. You sure you're okay? You've been off all night. I forced a laugh, light and airy, a mask I'd perfected. I'm fine really. Just tired. Maybe we can head home soon. He nodded, brushing a kiss against my temple. Give me 10 minutes to say goodbyes and we're out of here. I clung to that promise as he turned back to his friends, leaving me to drift in the tide of the crowd. My wine glass was empty now, a prop I'd forgotten to refill, and I set it on a passing tray, my hands restless. The room felt too small, the air too thick, and I found myself moving again, Not toward the door but deeper in toward the edge of the chaos where Daniel stood. I didn't plan it. My feet carried me there, drawn by a pull I couldn't name, stopping a safe distance away, close enough to see him, far enough to pretend it was chance. He noticed me then, his head turning slowly, and our eyes met across the divide. No words this time, just a look that carried everything. The ache, the guilt, the unspoken what. My breath caught, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single point of connection. Then he smiled, a small sad curve of his lips, and turned away, breaking the spell. He melted into the crowd, swallowed by laughter and clinking glasses, leaving me stranded with the weight of what I'd let happen. Not a touch, not a kiss, but something more. A betrayal born in the space between us, in the longing I'd let bloom. The drive home was quiet, Tom humming along to the radio while I stared out the window, the night blurring past in streaks of shadow and light. My mind replayed every moment. The terrace, Daniel's confession, the way I'd stood there, teetering, and hadn't walked away soon enough. Guilt gnawed at me, cold and insistent, but beneath it was something else, something sharper. A hunger I couldn't unfeel. When we got home, Tom trudged upstairs, shedding his jacket with a yawn. "Good night, huh?" he mumbled, already half asleep as he climbed into bed. "Yeah," I lied, lingering by the door. "Good night." I stayed downstairs longer than I needed, pouring a glass of water I didn't drink, staring at the kitchen counter as if it held answers. Tom's snores drifted down, a soft rumble of trust, and I pressed my hands to my face, tears slipping through my fingers. He didn't deserve this, didn't deserve the wife who'd stood on a terrace and let her heart wander, even if her body stayed loyal. I'd betrayed him in the quietest way, a sin of thought and feeling, veiled in the shadows of a night he'd never suspect. But as I climbed the stairs, the weight of it shifted, twisting into something I hadn't expected. I slipped into bed beside Tom, his warmth radiating through the sheets, and watched him sleep. His face slack, peaceful, the man who'd promised me forever and meant it. The guilt was there, a stone in my chest, but beneath it, a truth unfurled, slow and startling. The betrayal wasn't just his. It was mine too. I'd cheated on myself, on the Sarah I'd become, the one who'd settled into the grooves of this life, who'd let her edges dull and her wants fade. Daniel hadn't just stirred a longing for him. He'd woken a piece of me I'd buried under years of duty and routine. That moment on the terrace, the way his words had lit me up, it wasn't about him, not really. It was about the woman I'd forgotten, the one who'd once dreamed of more than this quiet, predictable existence. I turned onto my side, staring into the dark, the ceiling a blank canvas for my thoughts. Tom's breath steadied beside me, a rhythm I could set my life to, and I knew I wouldn't leave it, couldn't. This was my home, my family, the anchor I'd chosen. But the ember Daniel had sparked wouldn't die, no matter how I tried to smother it. It glowed, faint but persistent, a reminder of what I'd tasted. A version of myself I'd locked away. The tears came again, silent and hot, soaking into the pillow. I'd bury it, I told myself. I'd lock that night away, seal it behind smiles and school lunches and Tom's steady love. I'd be the wife he needed, the mother our kids deserved. But as dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in soft grays, I couldn't shake the quiet revelation. I'd carry this betrayal, not of Tom but of me, longer than I'd ever admit. Morning arrived with its usual clamor. Tom's alarm, the kids' chatter, the rush of coffee and chaos. I moved through it all, pouring cereal, tying shoelaces, kissing Tom goodbye as he headed to work. He paused at the door, looking back with that easy grin. "You sure you're okay? You seemed off last night." I nodded, the lie practice now. "Just tired. I'll catch up today." He accepted it, as he always did, and left me standing in the kitchen, the house settling into its daytime hush. I gripped the counter, staring at the sink where a single glass sat unwashed, mine from the night before. My reflection flickered in the window above it, distorted by the glass, and I wondered who she was now, the wife who'd stayed or the woman who'd dared to want. The phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Daniel. My heart lurched, but I didn't open it, not yet. I let it sit there, a silent question I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, I turned away, stepping back into the life I knew, the one I'd keep choosing. But the shadow of that night followed, a quiet companion I couldn't outrun, whispering of a Sarah I'd met, and might never meet again.